we're introduced to this chap called Nicodemus. We're told he's a Pharisee. That meant that he was from a conservative branch of first century Judaism, known and largely respected in the community for discipline and good deeds and a certain kind of orthodoxy, sometimes given to an excess of rules. But on top of this, that was his religious affiliation, he was a member of the Jewish ruling council. Almost certainly that's referring to the Sanhedrin, the top council of 70 or 72 people that rule the country under the Roman governor. And so this meant that he was part of a certain party, but belonging to the political elite. And because this political elite was also a religious elite, that is, the rulers were people committed to Judaism in some sense, though from different backgrounds, this put him at the top of a lot of heaps in the country. Down in verse 10, we're told that he's the teacher of Israel. That is, there is an article with the word. This should probably be rendered the teacher of Israel. He's the grand mufti. He's the Regius Professor of Divinity. So he's learned. He's theologically up there. He's politically connected. Later on, it appears that he probably is connected also with some wealth. But he comes to Jesus. He comes at night. Why? Oh, there have been lots of suggestions advanced. People have said, well, he didn't want to show up in the day. He was a bit embarrassed, you know. Jesus was a kind of itinerant preacher from the boonies. He was from up in Galilee, funny accent and all that. Whereas here was Nicodemus himself, the Regius Professor of Divinity. Why would he approach an itinerant preacher and get some theological advice? So he was embarrassed. I don't believe it for a moment. Nicodemus shows up several times in this book, and every time he doesn't really care what people think. He's got one independent spirit about him. He'll take on anybody if he thinks he's got a point. Now, to understand what John means by faithfully recording that it was night, you have to see how John himself, in his book, uses light and darkness, night and day, and things like that. One reason why it's mentioned that it was night is because it was night. That was the time. It was night. It's just an historical fact. But why does he even bother mentioning it? Almost certainly because John likes to play with these sorts of things. Later on, when Jesus is betrayed, Jesus dismisses Judas, the man who will ultimately betray him. And as the man goes out, John comments, and it was night. No doubt that was the time, all right, but John is making a deeper comment as he recounts the thing. He is saying he went out into the horrible darkness of lostness without light and hope anymore. Now, if that's what's going on, that's the way John does use this sort of language, then the text is saying that when Nicodemus came to Jesus, no doubt it was nighttime, but he came with a certain kind of lostness. He didn't even know how to approach properly. He was a bit baffled. He didn't quite know what he was doing. And that becomes pretty obvious as you read on. He comes with a certain kind of respect. It's quite remarkable for the Regius Professor of Divinity to approach an itinerant preacher and begin, Rabbi. The man is remarkable. And then he says, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. Well, we could start by asking why he starts with this we. There's no indication that he's brought his students with him. You know, my class and I together, we have come to this conclusion. There's no hint that anybody else is there. A royal we? That really makes it pompous. An editorial we? What's going on? Well, later on, you'll see that Jesus carefully draws attention to this we language. It's almost impossible to avoid the conclusion that for all the formal respect that Nicodemus displays toward Jesus, there is a little element of pomposity. Rabbi, we have been examining you, and we have observed that you're not the run-of-the-mill sort of religious teacher. There are all kinds of quacks out there who claim to do miracles, and they're all fraudulent. But we look at the kind of thing that you do, and we cannot deny that this is miraculous. The only explanation is that it is from God. So we have come to the conclusion, that you are a teacher sent from God. That's what it sounds like. In one sense, it's commendable. At least the chap is looking honestly at the phenomena. He's not simply dismissing Jesus as some sort of nutcase, one more religious quack. The ancient world had its share. We have our share today, too. The kind of things that Jesus did were a cut above. And Nicodemus wasn't going to deny the evidence. And yet this editorial we theologians perhaps have been examining these things. It does sound a wee bit pompous. And then verse 3 finds Jesus saying, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born again."